This episode is brought to you by the Black Cat Shadow Movie Store. Just go to stores.ebay.com/Black Cat Shadow Movie Store, where you'll find a great selection of hard-to-find and rare movies from VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray, and free shipping on every item. Check it out now.
Is imagination simply contained in the mind, or does it tap into an unseen world with messages waiting to be told? There is a place where legends cross over into our world, where strange visions and whispers beckon, and superstition takes hold. Step into the Black Cat's shadow.
Welcome back to the Black Cat Shadow. I'm your host, Andy, podcasting from Kansas City, Missouri.
And I'm Phantom Dark Dave, coming at you live from the heart of Texas. With us today, a guest who, in the span of 3 years, appeared in 3 films based on the works of Clive Barker. With no intention to butter him up, he was the memorable Cenobite Butterball. In 1990, he got to leave the torso piece behind as he dwelled in the mythical place of Midian in the feature film Nightbreed. Please welcome to the show the reincarnation of Peter Vincent, Mr. Simon Bamford. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. You've been doing your homework.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I've been. So we're really thrilled to have you on the show today, and so we want to give our listeners a chance to find out how you got started in your acting career. Like what propelled you to start acting?
I started off. It was in kind of kindergarten, as you'd say it over there, but it was kind of infant school over here. We had a headmaster who was really keen on amateur dramatics and these ghastly, awful productions that he used to put on, that we all thought we were kind of cool and wonderful in, and all the parents have to sit and watch and then tell their kids how good they are afterwards. That was, I think, it's most people's kind of introduction to getting on the stage. And it's just it's your first experience of having your ego let out to play, I think, for most people, being on the stage, and that certainly was the case for me.
I think your first major role was in the Hellraiser movie, and I think that's what a lot of people know. Know your character, but the Butterball Cenobite, and they may not actually know you per se, but they know definitely the character, but he definitely has a distinct look about him. How long did that makeup actually take to put on? Was that a full mask, or was it just prosthetics?
Yeah, no, it was mine was one of the easier masks to put on. They did a live cast beforehand, which kind of matched my face inside of it. It was about 2 inches thick because I was quite a skinny kid back then. I was only 25 when we made Hellraiser, and it was basically one mask it took 3 of them to force it down onto my head. There was a section where the 3 of them were pulling it down, and the mask would be covering my nose and my mouth at the same moment before it kind of fully fitted. And I always thought if it stuck there, then that would be it. I would be deceased.
Death by the Butterball.
Trying to tear this latex mask off, but that was never going to happen. Then they glue the edges down with surgical super glue, at least they did back in those days. So it's kind of glued to your face. And then, but before they did all of that, they made my mouth up black so you couldn't see me through the teeth, through the mouth of Butterball. Put a skull cap on, obviously, so when they took it off, it didn't kind of tear all my hair out. And they put Vaseline all over my eyebrows and any other hair that was around. So it was the putting on and taking off wasn't too bad. But it was just when I was in it, it was pretty awful experience, because he had no eye holes, he had no nose hole, he had no ear holes. He was an arsehole, basically. No, he had a mouth. That was it. And so once we were in it, we kind of, me and Nick Chatterall were blind, deaf and dumb. because they then glued dentures, false dentures, on top of our own teeth. So we couldn't speak, we couldn't put our mouths together. And originally, Butterball did actually have dialogue in the first scripts, but they were all sentences with P's and B's in them, and you can't say a P or a B unless you can put your lips together. And I couldn't because the teeth were so big. So my lines were, perhaps we prefer you, and impossible. And you can try it now. If you can't put your lips together, it's perhaps we prefer you, and hot. It's not very scary. It doesn't really do it.
No, it doesn't have the same ring, that's for sure.
Your main character will be trying to figure out what you just said. I had my mic muted. I was trying. I couldn't do it.
But, the Cenobite characters, they're very interesting and fascinating characters. And, in those movies, we don't get a whole lot of backstory to them. Was there a backstory to your Cenobite?
I was told by Clive before we started filming that Butterball was the torturer of the group. I think Nick was told he was the dog of the group. Doug was the lead. I don't know what Barb or Grace were, but I was supposed to be the torturer. I had a big apron of torture items, so I was kind of the Leatherface, I suppose, of the Cenobites. And I agree. I think we were interesting characters until Hellraiser 3, because in 1 and 2 we were high priests of hell. We had this kind of depth and his history to us, that we came from kind of the realms of under the earth. And I think that we just seemed to be these kind of mystical, interesting creatures. And then Hellraiser 3, they kind of blew that out of the water by saying that anybody could become a Cenobite. All they needed to be was kind of Cenobited. And then, you've got all these guys in nightclubs with CDs in their heads. And I thought that was a terrible mistake, because it weakened us as a kind of tribe.
Yeah, and thank God they weren't shooting vinyl records out, right?
Yeah.
It'd be huge.
Yeah. Also, that kind of ages it. You couldn't really have a streaming Cenobite, could you?
Oh no.
Well, you probably could. Actually, you probably could. Yeah, you could, but it would be a very different stream. A pissing Cenobite. You see, there we go.
Oh, man.
Now we're getting into Clive's mind again. A pissing Cenobite, pissing acid, or something. That would be interesting. That I'd like to see.
Simon's already working on the new Hellraiser. You hear that?
Yeah, I really wish that we would have seen more of the Cenobites, because in the first movie, they, like, on the movie poster you see Doug Bradley and you see Pinhead, so you're expecting like the Cenobites to be front and center, but they're really not. So it's interesting to see that, like, how they were more in the background, and I think that probably lent them made him more fascinating, probably, to keep him out of the front center.
Sure. Clive always said that the best monsters you see the least of. Less is always more. And I think, especially with makeups that unique and unusual, it leaves you wanting to see more. And I think that's good. If you'd seen them loads and loads and loads, you got bored of them and used to them. And it's their uniqueness and surprise that makes them work.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't seen any documentation on it, so I'm just going off my own brain, but it almost seems like Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez did the same thing with From Dusk Till Dawn, where it's a vampire movie, but you don't get the vampires till well over an hour into the film. And so in Hellraiser, you have this storyline that, if you bought the movie based on the cover, you're wondering, where's the cover? Where's these creatures? But then you have an intriguing storyline that people may or may not be able to relate to, but they can definitely sense what's going on. But then, when the gates of hell are open, and all hell lets loose, you don't know what you're in for. And I feel like you guys, you said 25, right? Age 25, you were able to step inside kind of the mentality of this creature, like you said, the Leatherface of the group. And it's downright frightening. And, who's to say you're some child's nightmare to this day.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because there are lots of different threads to the story, and these days we're very used to watching movies and seeing TV things where there are loads of different threads of storyline going on at the same time that merge at certain points. But back in the day, back in the 80s, that was quite rare. We were used to kind of a single storyline, and I think as an audience we were treated as though we were slightly thick, but it's what we were used to. These days we're so used to juggling all sorts of information at the same time, and we expect that from our entertainment as well. So we expect to see, in fact, if you do see a very basic storyline, it actually can be a bit dull. We need all these different threads and things to make life interesting. But back then that wasn't really happening, and Hellraiser was unique in that way. I hadn't thought of that, but very much part of Clive's world as well. Clive likes to work on different levels, all the way in the way that Shakespeare did. There's always underlying stuff that's happening in Clive's work that if you think about it in a different way, you suddenly realize that it's there.
Yeah, and thinking about the Cenobites, like their mannerisms and things, and with characters where you don't have any dialogue, the body language is so important to those characters to convey their personality. So I think you guys did a great job of creating terrifying characters that just didn't have you didn't have to say what you were going to do. People could infer just by looking at you what you were going to do to them.
Yeah, I think you're being very generous to me there, to be honest. There was so little I could actually do in that. I mean, the bodysuit was vast. I tried to kind of think about walking like a pregnant woman, so to kind of get that, or to somebody heavy. But beyond that, there was very little I could do. My arms would just about go around the damn thing. I couldn't get the face to move at all. It just wouldn't move. I could make my face inside it contort completely, but the face of Butterball wasn't moving. So all I had was a tongue. So you're very generous. Although Doug has said recently that actually the less we did anyway, the better, because it just made them very powerful. The more we did, the more we weakened them. And Clive and Doug realised that when we were filming, that less was best. So that was, in my case, thankfully, because there's nothing much more I could do. And also that makes it a screen that you then, the viewer, puts their own fears onto, puts their own stories onto.
I think he has an interesting idea. I mean, I already wrote down, he's literally writing the next Hellraiser. We've already introduced a pregnant Cenobite. Why hasn't that been done? And what can happen with that? As long as the baby doesn't shoot CDs, right? We're good.
Yeah, there is stuff I could say there, but I'm not allowed to. So there you go.
Okay. Well, and then moving on to another one of the movies that people may know you from is Nightbreed, and I think Dave, you have kind of a connection with this movie. You saw it at a young age. Tell what's your story on that?
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, I used to live under a cemetery. Wait, that's not right. Okay. No, honest truth. When I was younger, when the video store existed and that was your source of watching film, we had picked up a copy of Nightbreed, a friend and we didn't know anything about it. Wasn't into reading at the time. Couldn't appreciate a good book if it hit me in the face. And we stuck in this copy of Nightbreed, and I didn't know what I was getting into, but for a while, I was sucked into this storyline where all I saw were these monsters and these grotesque different figures. And then, you're introduced to some of the characters very, very Clive Barker-ish right away. And then we get to meet your character, who's kind of like a guardian, so to speak. He dwells at this mythical place, and you always see him. And what I said in the intro, too, is so cool. You got to leave the prosthetics and the torso behind. For years, I felt like that movie was just a figment of my imagination, because if I felt like Nightbreed has resurfaced over time and developed a nice cult classic following, but I had to I had vivid imagery of this movie that I had no idea what it was growing up, and I was trying to find it, and there was no IMDb at the time. You couldn't. There's no YouTube, and I struggled to figure out what movie this was, and it literally wasn't until a few months ago where I saw a cover of Nightbreed, and I jumped at it and I looked at it. Like, oh my God, I think this is it. And then so, I went and I purchased it on iTunes, and I was able to watch it, in full HD, and it was beautiful. And I'm seeing all these characters come to life, and then there you are. And I'm like, man, this all comes together so well. And so, yeah, you and Nick had a huge piece of the childhood, because forever I'm like, where did those guys go? Who was that? I'll tell you, Andy and I both really love the movie, and one of the questions that we had come up with your character Onaka is, what direction were you given with that character? Did you have freedom of choice for, expression? Did you make that character your own, or did you have some sort of, go by?
I had quite a lot of freedom on it. I talked to Clive about it before we started filming because, again, he had virtually no dialogue. I had some, a little bit, but very little. But he seemed to be in kind of every other scene when he got to Midian, at least in the early scenes. And I thought, well, how do I play this? I don't understand. So I talked to Clive about it, and he on the phone, because this was before the days of the internet, and he gave me a list of kind of 6, I think, really obscure Italian films that he was kind of thinking of, and one which was Death in Venice, of the boy in that, which was one I could find. The other 6 obscure Italian films I couldn't find anywhere. I mean, it was lovely. And he was saying, it's like this character in this film, and it's like this character in this film. And okay, right, I was writing it all down kind of frantically, and then I thought, well, how the hell am I going to find these films? No, there's no internet. There was no. It wasn't, because they were obscure. They weren't the kind of things you could go to your local Blockbusters and hire. So, I mean, I tried ringing around places in London, but I couldn't find any of them. Death in Venice was the only one. But he talked about an innocence and a kind of cheekiness. And also, when Clive and I first met, I was playing the Fool in a production of King Lear in London. And that's where he first saw me, and afterwards asked if I wanted to join his theatre company. And I think the character was very much along the lines of the Fool, in that he was around a lot and he was seeing what was happening. And it was very similar, because I was sidekick to Doug's character Lylesburg, who was supposedly the head, the ruler of Midian at that time. And his character was very, very similar to King Lear. So I think my character was very similar to, I think it was the same relationship, that I could see this man who was slowly going mad and wasn't really coping with the world around him. And I was there to try and guide him and help him entertain, but not doing a very good job. And but actually, when we actually got to filming it, I was just kind of really left to my own devices. It's kind of, okay, this is happening in this scene. How does my character think about it, and how would he react to it? And then that's really how I was approaching each day's shoot, was just trying to work out what he would think to what was happening. I did actually, but my very first day on set was one of the hardest ones. We was under the ground in Midian, and we were supposed to be listening to Boone, who was being chased or something, but I was very upset by the whole thing. And my first day shooting, my first shot on the set, was sitting in a corner, and I was supposed to be crying my eyes out because of what was happening above, which is really tough. Your first day on a set to be, okay, sit there now, cry. It's like, what? Yeah.
Might as well get the hard scene over with first, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting, actually, when we got to my death scene, spoiler, but we got to the death scene on that, and I was being beaten up by a load of cops, and we got a fight director on set, and he was kind of choreographing, I got thrown forward here, I pull back here, and then he hits me with a rifle butt, or a baton, I think he had, and we mistimed it on the second take, and I came up too early, and he brought the baton down, and there was this big crack, and basically he did just whack the back of my head with the rifle, or the baton, and whatever it was, and it all went really quiet, and I was like, okay, oh my God, that really, really hurt. But up until that point, I'd been doing a lot of shouting and screaming and wailing and things. And I said to Clive after that, look, the reality of that was when I got hit there for real, I went absolutely quiet. So it's more, I think the reality of the scene is that he does go more fetal and more into himself rather than doing it all outside. And that is where we went to after that, which is pretty much, there was a pretty much how it was put together in the end, that he goes very quiet and into himself once he's had the medal ripped off his chest and all of those things. And that
scene was one of the more disturbing scenes, in that movie. I thought
it was nice having Danny Elfman's score behind it as well. I mean, he's a genius, and that score really helps it. You watch it without the score, it's not nearly as powerful, but yeah, it was nice. And what amazed me, Clive was very generous when the first theatrical cut came out. Pretty much every shot I'd shot while we'd been working at Pinewood, I was in. He'd hardly cut me out at all, which was nice. Which I was very grateful for. Doesn't happen often.
Yeah, I mean, especially with how much that movie was cut up by the studio.
Yeah, the director's cut is such a superior film. It's a shame it took 25 years to actually get the release, but at least it's now got the release.
That's the one I actually have too, is the director's cut. It's
so much better than the theatrical release.
It's longer.
Yeah. But it gives you time to get to know the lead characters. So you like Laurie, you like Boone, and you want to go on the journey with them. And that is the main difference, I think, because then you're happy, you empathize with them. You feel their pain when they're going through bad times. Whereas in the first one, they didn't really want you to. The studio didn't want you to like them. They wanted it to be more of a slasher film.
I like the way it goes because it reminds you at the end that it is a love story, and it kind of has that turn full circle. Not for your character. I mean, you. Yeah. There's a reason there's no Nightbreed 2, right? But
yeah, for me,
it doesn't end well for some folks. But the movie is fantastic. Anybody that hasn't seen it yet, minus any spoilers, it's well worth watching because it's truly an experience all on its own, both visually and climatically. Some other things I was looking at on your IMDb page too that was fascinating was you did yet another Clive Barker somewhat touched on film, The Book of Blood, in 2009. You played Derek. So, yeah, what's it like going from Clive Barker? Okay, I'm going to take a break from Clive Barker. I'm going to do some other things around here. Oh wait, another Clive Barker film?
Well, that was a weird one. And again with Doug as well, because he was in that, Doug Bradley. When before the Hellraisers, before Clive was when I first knew Clive, he was a starving artist, and we were working in Fringe Theatre in London and Europe. And then his very first books were published, short stories, The Books of Blood. And the very first story in the first Book of Blood is about this guy called Simon McNeill, who pretends that he can contact the spirits and the dead. But he can't. He's a fraud, and he's contacted by these psychic investigators who found this house where these strange things are happening, and they ask him to come in because they think he will be useful. The spirits that are in this house see immediately this guy's a fraud. So when he's there on his own overnight, they come down and they take their revenge on him for being a fraud, and they carve out these tiny little stories of the books of the dead, the stories of the dead. So when they find him in the morning, he has a whole story carved in blood on each eyeball. He has these books. It's a lovely story. And when they were published, Clive admitted that when he was thinking about the character of Simon McNeill, he was thinking of me. So I was the original Simon McNeill. So I had the Books of Blood written on me. So when I found out 20 years later that they were going to film the Book of Blood story as a movie, I contacted the casting director and I contacted the director, and I heard nothing back from them at all. So I sent an email over to Clive, and the next morning I had the casting director and the director saying, "Yeah, of course we'll put a part in for you." So they just wrote this cameo role in. Actually, they didn't write it in; it was cast already, so I bumped some other poor actor off it. But it was filmed in Scotland, in Edinburgh. I hadn't done a movie. I worked in theatre. After Nightbreed, I went into theatre and kind of worked there for decades, and I hadn't filmed anything for 20 years. So when we actually got to Edinburgh, I was so nervous. I actually was throwing up the night before because I was so terrified of doing this. What have I let myself in for? What am I doing? But that was a good experience, and there were some really nice actors on it. Yeah, it was good. It was good, and it came out. It came out well. I think my character is a bit comedy for it, to be honest. Sometimes when you watch it a few years later, you think, "Oh no, that was okay, that worked." But when you see it for the first time, it's, "Oh my god, what am I doing?"
Well, then after that, you got to be in the movie Tony Todd, Candyman, Dead of Night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, I've met Tony a few times at conventions and things, so he's amazing. Have you met him? He's like this man giant.
He's huge. I remember.
His hands the size of my head, and he's got this big, deep voice. No, he's a lovely guy. So it was nice to get the chance to work with him as well over in Wales. We filmed that one. Yeah, another comedy character in a horror film. And that kind of seemed to be the way I was going, because then recently I did the Peter Vincent character in the documentary for Fright Night, which was good. The company who made that made the Leviathan, which was the making of Hellraiser documentary, which was 7 hours long. I have to admit I haven't watched it all yet. I got about 4 hours in. Oh my god, how long does this go on for? It was good. It's really good. Don't get me wrong. It's good. They're a great company, but I think they learned a lesson from that. So yeah, and then they were looking for somebody to play Roddy McDowall's character, and they thought, well, who do we know that looks a little bit like him? And they came up with me, and I went, yeah, I'd love to play that. It'd be cool. And I haven't laughed so much in ages. Not everybody liked it. I've read some bad reviews. You shouldn't read reviews, but I don't care. We had so much fun making it. And it's not supposed to be Roddy McDowall. It's supposed to be Peter Vincent, and he was a kind of spoof TV host character anyway. We took it a little bit further, that his own ego and vanity had gone a bit beyond what's acceptable.
Yeah, you guys got to recreate a little bit of Hammer horror there with your buddy Nick. But you got reunited there from Hellraiser.
Yeah, that's right. They had a load of money left over, so they asked if we'd be interested in doing some trailers for fictitious Peter Vincent films. They were so much fun. The psychedelic one was my favourite in the 70s. So we did like 50s, 60s, 70s trailers for films that don't exist. They were great fun, and great working with Nick. First time I worked with Nick since Nightbreed. So, and then recently with the same company, Dead Mouse Productions, and I can't think their other name. We've last weekend we had a short film called The Offer. Was released, which we went to the screening of last week, and it's really good. It was really good. There's going to be 6 episodes. I think it's kind of mainly making them for TV, but where they will be shown, I don't know yet. But I'm sure they'll be snapped up now. I've seen the first one. And the first one had quite a load of us from the original Hellraiser. There was myself and Nick and Oliver Smith, who played the Skinned Man in Hellraiser 1 and 2. And then from Hellraiser 2, there was Barbie Wilde, who was the female Cenobite, and Ken Cranham, who was Dr. Shenard. So it was quite a reunion for us all. But it's a great film. It's a great film. And then we're currently working on number 2, which is called Mrs. Wiltshire. It's the 2nd episode. And I got a very interesting part in that, which I can't really say more about, but I'm really excited. I've been learning it since May, and here we are in October. We were supposed to be filming it next week, but it's just been put back to February, so I've got to keep it all in my cranium now until February. Yeah.
I'm going to break a rule. I'm going to go back in time. I know usually we do things chronologically, but
I'll jump forward.
I feel like we jumped past Hellraiser 2. We kind of lumped it into one,
yeah,
but those movies came out really close together. So when you were shooting the first one, were you already informed that you're going to be reprising your role in a part 2?
When the first Hellraiser was with a very small budget. I think it was £300,000. It was very small when we started it. When they started sending, it was American-backed money though. And when they started sending the money, the rushes over to the States, there was a lot of excitement, especially obviously around our characters, because they could see that this was something completely unique and different. And they immediately asked for Clive to rewrite the ending to allow for a sequel, and they increased the budget quite considerably because they realized it could be more successful than they were originally imagining. And they also kind of then changed slightly where it was set. It was always set in England, to start with, but kind of the finished Hellraiser 1 is kind of in this mid-Atlantic place. You think it's in America because a lot of the cast are speaking American with an accent, and then you get this 125 English train go through, and you think, where is this film set? So it was a bit kind of it wasn't clear. By the time we had finished filming, yes, they knew that there was definitely going to be a sequel. They changed the ending with the. I found something really interesting the other day. The big dragon creature that flies off at the end. The guy who made that, again, because it was a kind of last minute thing because they changed it for the ending, I think he was given £50 to make that. He went to the local butchers and bought a load of bones, all the bones he could find, and he sorted them all out and he glued them together. There was real bones on that thing. And that's the only budget he had for that. I love that. He hates it now. He says he sees all the faults in it, but I love it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say he now shares that title with you of being Leatherface of Hellraiser if he's gluing bones together.
Yeah.
Speaking of creations like that, in Hellraiser 2, we talked about kind of some of the difficulties you had and how it took 3 people to get the costume together. Did they modify that to make it easier for you to wear in the second one, or?
Yeah, I asked them because when they asked me to do the second one, I thought it had been such an awful experience doing the first one, being blind especially, because you sit there for hours and hours and hours. I mean, like 12, 14 hours sometimes. And that's fine, you accept that as part of filming. But when you then can't read or see or do anything or talk to anybody, you're just sitting with your own thoughts. It was slowly driving me mad, to be honest. And I thought, I'm not sure I can psychologically go through this experience again because it was horrible. So I asked them if the character was going to take his sunglasses off. And they said, no, it wasn't in the script that he would. So I said to them, I'm going to gouge some holes out in the makeup. I think each makeup was like £10,000 or something. It was ridiculously expensive. But so I got my makeup on the first day and I kind of gouged these little holes out. And actually on the second film, there's a difference. His glasses are slightly different. There are side pieces built into them so that if they did have a side shot, you couldn't see the hole. Not that you would, but because there were such dark scenes anyway. But it helped a little bit. But then everybody assumes then that you can see fine, and I couldn't because there were only really pinholes that I was looking through. And then on top of the pinhole was dark glasses on a dark set. So really, by the time we got to the set, I was really back to being blind. It was interesting talking to Doug about that as well, because he had black contact lenses in. And he was saying the other day that he had, once they put the contact lenses in and they took the set down to the kind of dark lighting, he was pretty much blind as well.
Seems like he just got to see a different shade of darkness, really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, it was more fun. It was interesting doing the second one. The script for that was interesting when it arrived because it was a story you could follow up until for the first 2/3 of the script. But then when you got to the last third, it was basically descriptions of special effects on special effects on special effects. And then there'd be a little bit about what a character was doing, and then there'd be more descriptions of special effects and special. And actually, it was almost impossible to read because you couldn't really understand what was going on because of they're going down into hell and everything else, and virtually no dialogue. So I don't know if they still write the scripts like that where there is so many special effects involved, but it is hard to follow what's happening.
It just has a big parentheses and it says budget spent here.
Yeah. Although, it was no CGI in those days, so it was all kind of matte paintings and stuff, which are such clever things when you see how they actually work, and you see that they've just got this this piece of glass with whatever is on kind of painted on it, and a hole in the middle where you're acting, and they can shoot the whole thing. It's so clever, matte paintings.
Yeah, for sure. So one last question here: through traveling in other men's skin, how has that journey helped you to get to know yourself better?
I write some bullshit, don't I? I did that tongue in cheek. You'd have read that off my website. Oh, well, actually, it's helping a lot at the moment. No, it always has. I think it's interesting to play somebody else. You get a chance to escape from who you are, and obviously, other characters in films and things, they're interesting. Otherwise, they wouldn't be being made into films. Whereas the mundane lives that most of us lead, most of the time. The nice thing about playing a part in a film or a play or anything else is that you know that they're going to go on an interesting journey, because otherwise they wouldn't be filming it or making it or putting it on as a play. And it's great to contact sometimes emotions and go to places that you would never really ever be allowed to do anywhere else. That's why I'm really looking forward to Mrs. Wiltshire. It's a really interesting script and very emotional script, and that's going to be great to try and go there in with that kind of truthful reality as well. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, where can people go to kind of keep up to date with what's going on with you and what projects you're working on?
Well, you can go to my shitty website, as you've just seen, which I promise I will change, but I won't send anybody there. IMDb is probably the best places for what's coming up. That's easily found. Or I've got a Twitter account or a Facebook account. Twitter is, I think, just Simon.Bamford or Simon Bamford, I think. I don't know. You'll find it. And that's the same with my Facebook as well. So, yeah, any of those. And, yeah, we've got a few conventions as well coming up. I'm going over to see Clive, actually, in a couple of weeks in LA. And, something I'm really excited about. A friend of his works for Warner Brothers, and a friend of mine works for Virgin Atlantic, and together they've managed to get me tickets to go and see The Big Bang Theory. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
The Big Bang Theory. So I'm going to see that being filmed. I'm so excited, I can't tell you, and have a kind of set tour beforehand. Yeah, excellent. So yeah, I'm going to, and then we've got Doug and Nick and Barbie and I have a convention in Chicago at Days of the Dead, which I think is the 17th, the weekend of the 13th, 14th, 15th, 17th, weekend of the 17th of November.
Awesome.
Well, leave it to Simon to come on our show and promote The Big Bang Theory.
I love Big Bang Theory.
Awesome. Well, Simon, we want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
And you. Cheers. It's my pleasure.
Hey, I'd like to take a minute to tell you guys about the Black Cat Shadow movie store. If you haven't already heard about it, it's a eBay store that we have, and it sells rare, hard to find movies on VHS, Blu-ray, and DVD. Check it out. You never know what you're going to find. Like right now, we've got a lot of VHS tapes. I like some old 50s and 60s horror movies and science fiction. We have some 80s VHS on there with some really cool artwork. So go on there, check it out. I'm listing stuff every day. So come back and see what we got. We got some rare DVDs on there and some out of print stuff. So go on there, check it out. Every time you buy something, it helps the show, and we really appreciate it. It just helps us with the costs of doing the podcast. And I don't know about you guys, but I love going out and finding these movies. And if that's something that I can do for you guys, then that's great. I'd love to be able to help you complete your collection or grow your collection, whatever it may be. So come on over. Again, it's stores.ebay.com/Black Cat's Shadow Movie Store. There's a link on the homepage of blackcatshadow.com too, so you can find it there, or you can just go to eBay and do a search there. But it's free shipping on every item. I try to keep the prices fair. So go over there, check it out, and thanks for supporting the show.
We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
Welcome back to the Black Cat Shadow. I'm your host, Andy, podcasting from Kansas City, Missouri. My guest today is an actress and dancer who can do a mean robot, who has performed on stage and screen all over the world. She is also an accomplished author, having contributed short stories to many horror anthologies, along with her first novel, The Venus Complex, published in 2012. A demon to some, an angel to others, she played the female Cenobite in Hellbound Hellraiser 2. Please welcome to the show, Barbie Wilde.
Hi there.
Hey, Barbie. So glad to have you on the show today.
Well, it's a pleasure being here or there or wherever we are in the cyberspace.
Yeah, definitely. We're just out here in the Black Cat Shadow, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. The shadowy environs.
So, looking at, you have, quite a varied career as a performer in general. Have you always been a performer even as a kid, or did you discover this talent later on when you were older?
No, I think this all came about because I was, one of those miserable little. Well, I wasn't miserable actually. I was quite a happy child, but no one paid any attention to me. I had no friends, and then one day I was cast in a school play called The Mighty Germ, and I was the teacher. And as part of my shtick, I developed this sort of sneeze because this germ infected all the children in the class, and I got infected. I had the sneeze, and so I don't know if you've ever seen a film called The Day of the Jackal, the original version. But when the jackal is shot at the end, spoiler alert, he sort of throws himself backward up against the wall with the force of the bullets hitting him. And I sort of did the same kind of movement, which caused, hilarity amongst the student body. And even my teachers were laughing at my sort of antics. And I loved that. This sort of, and I thought, this is it. This is my, I'll be an actress, I think I was about 12 or something. But it was still always a bit of a struggle. But when I was 17, I moved and sort of kind of recreated myself a bit. I tried to be less of a nerd, and but the real freeing of me was moving to London, England, and I went there as part of my university course, and then just stayed on, and was through the people I met. Got involved in doing my classical mime professionally. I know that seems highly unlikely. We didn't really earn any money, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And through that, sort of in a backdoor way, getting involved in the music business and signing with RCA Records. So we had the group I was in had a very theatrical show. And but because it was the 80s and everything seemed so possible, being in London just a very liberating experience for me. So I suppose the short answer is yes. I've always loved doing that kind of thing. I don't know how. I think I'm probably better at portraying myself as a TV presenter. I did that for 4 or 5 different shows and stuff. But I think people have a tendency to think that actors have some control over the narrative arc of their careers, and. and believe me, I mean, my agent calls up and said, "Hey, I want you to do this gig. You're going to go and be a robotic dancer in a Bollywood movie." I'd go, "Oh yeah, sure, okay." It wasn't me sort of, "I'm going to be a robotic dancer in the Bollywood movie." So it's there's at any one time in the UK, which is a relatively small country. 90% of actors are out of work at any one time. Might even be higher than that. So if your agent calls, and if it's not something hideous, you're going to probably want to do it. But I was lucky enough that I was always offered very interesting, weird jobs, because I like to think of myself at that point anyway as interesting and weird. So it all fit together very nicely.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the music group you're in, and the group was it was a dance group named Shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, you actually got to open for some pretty cool bands. Tell us a little bit about that group.
Well, we sort of, through the mime thing, we sort of got, it was very popular at the time, it's sort of doing robotic type movements. And my partner, Tim Dry, and I decided to sort of corner the market and plan moving mannequins. And we met 2 people that had just popped out of drama school. And they were sort of they had a disco dance act, and they were doing something inside the store that we were, and the guy, Robert Pereno and Ellie Richards were the 2 people, and Robert just went, "Hey, let's get together. And, we call ourselves Shock. Why don't you join us?" And we got a few other people, Sean Crawford and Carol Kaplan, and we had this group, and we just started doing. We got into. We started doing more and more gigs around London and touring and stuff. And then we met 2 people who were very keen, very at the heart of the music scene. Richard, who's produced Band Ballet, that was a very big band in the 80s, and Rusty Egan, and they had produced this track, and they wanted us to sing on it called Angel Fest, and we signed to RCA Records. Not only were we supporting bands like Gary Newman, Adam the Ants, Classic Nouveau, and Depeche Mode, we were also promoting our singles at the same time. We did a huge amount of touring up down the UK and some in Europe. We had a week-long residency in New York at the Ritz Club, and we also did a few weeks in Thailand too, which was very strange. But no, there was I love the 80s. It was a wonderful stuff, and it seemed we were at the heart of it, which was great.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty cool opportunity to be able to travel the world and meet some interesting people like you did. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, and it was great. And a lot of people used to come and see us because we had this reputation. We weren't particularly great dancers. When I sort of created the Wikipedia entry for Shock, I actually put down that we were more like a burlesque group because we sang, we danced. A lot of the songs we did were our own compositions. But it was just it was something different. It wasn't just a dance group. We did a lot of weird stuff, but it was a very dark visions, and we used a lot of our friends' music as well. Our producer Richard Burgess had a band called Landscape, and they had a hit with a song called Einstein a Go-Go, and that was one of the things that we opened our show with. And we had music from Visage and David Bowie saying things. It was just very sort of inventive kind of mix of music and vocals and text and stuff like that. It was just a little bit different.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was just a cool thing to see, like, somebody that's going to like a Depeche Mode show and then they see your band opening for them. It's like, wow, what's this? And it's almost like you guys were like, I guess not quite Cirque du Soleil, but you were more of an artistic kind of like visual, physical act. And
yes, I think that we didn't have any circus skills, but I think that's a very good analogy actually, because we were kind of it was very wildly inventive stuff for the time, and we had sort of amazing costumes done by Jane Kahn and Bell, and it's interesting because people would come and see us performing, and then all of a sudden Toya pops up and then she's wearing, the same sort of outfits and stuff like that. So it was just, we sort of, although we didn't make any money, people would come along and be inspired by what we were doing and use it in their own thing, which unfortunately is often the way it works. I'm not trying to say we were groundbreakers in any way, shape, or form, but I think it was, we were certainly unusual and people appreciated that. So it was an enormously fun time. But as with all things, a lack of financial success made things kind of difficult. And we, in the end, sort of, broke apart. And LA and Robert continued on as a group called Pleasure and the Beast. And my then ex-partner, Tim Dry, and his robotic partner Sean Crawford became Tick and Talk, and they supported Gary Newman in, I think it was his farewell tour, his Warriors tour. I think the farewell tour came before the Warriors tour. I can't remember, but so they went on and became sort of famous as they released a couple of singles as well. So and I just went back to acting and did Death Wish 3, and then the Bollywood movie called Jambaz, and then in 1988, Hellraiser.
Speaking of Death Wish 3, it's funny, like I kind of see you in that movie as kind of the voice of reason for the gang. Like at the end, after Fraker, the gang leader, he's killed by Charles Bronson. You're kind of like, no, we need to just stop and just, he's like too much for us or something. Yeah.
We got to dial it back a bit. Now, I'll never forget when my big brother saw the movie and he said, Barbie Wilde, Peacemaker, No, that was it was a funny experience, but it was, Michael Winner is a real sort of shoot from the hip director. And he said, that scream I gave, as Fraker is shot out of the window, he said, you've got one take to do that. And so that scream is not only me acting, it's an actor's utter fear and terror that she's going to mess it up as well. But there was a lot of motivation in that scream.
Well, and I guess, that neighborhood that you guys filmed in, it was a high crime area in real life. I mean, did you guys have any trouble with real gangs while you were filming?
The whole thing was filmed in England.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, you knew that? Oh, so Lambeth. I don't know if it was a high crime area at that point. It probably was.
It's amazing because, I mean, you would think it was filmed in a New York neighborhood, but it was filmed in London, built on a set, right?
Yes, yeah, it was they were demolishing a hospital, and all these different buildings were part of it. And so they basically created the set within this area of buildings and stuff, so it looked really run down. And there is, of course, a company that provides, cars, American cars to because Pinewood and stuff like that. They often do American-based movies there because the studio facilities are so good. The establishing shots in New York, but I think it might have been a lot cheaper. I'm not sure, actually. I think New York is probably a lot more open to filming, but that's why they got a lot of the actors are British-based American actors in that film. But some of them obviously were brought over. But there were a lot of the establishing shots were actually done in New York, but it was all filmed in beautiful downtown, dirty Lambeth, which is probably very, very genteel now. But it wasn't that great a neighborhood back then. But I did see, the kind of gang activity you get in the UK is, there are gangs, obviously, and people get killed, but it's not anywhere near. People aren't armed in the same way as they are in America. That's the statement of the century.
Oh, yeah. And you went on, like you said, in 1988 to be involved in Hellraiser 2. How did you get involved in that project?
Well, my agent called me, and they wanted me to go to an audition for the film. And, of course, I'd seen it because there was a lot of talk about this film because Clive Barker had just, the Books of Blood had just come out, and he was the new face of British horror. So we all went to see it. I was very disturbed by the film. I'd never seen monsters like that before, and ones that talk to you, and they're not holding chainsaws. They've got these chains, and it's very strange. And the sort of S&M element of it was very interesting. And Julia was such an extraordinary character. But when they said I was playing a Cenobite, the only one I could really remember, obviously Pinhead, but I just remember the visual image of the Chatterer. And I thought, that's got to be one of the most disturbing faces I've ever seen in my life. And I don't particularly want to be that face. But then, a friend of mine just said, oh, go on, Barbie. They'll be writing books about you. Barbie Wilde, Queen of the B movies, which is, I wouldn't consider Hellraiser a B movie, but it was a sequel. And so I went along and found out I was playing the female Cenobite, and had a chat to Tony Randall, and he said, "Oh, it's a word that Clive made up," and I said, "No, it's actually in the dictionary. It means a member of an order, a religious order." And he said, "No, I'm sure that Clive made it up," and I went, "No." Rule number one of auditions: don't contradict the director, But anyway, he sort of had to acknowledge that yes, it was a word that it was in the dictionary, and I got the part. I don't know why. I know that Clive loved mime, and the fact that I was a classically trained mime artist might have had something to do with it. I don't, because I knew what Cenobite meant. I don't know. I think that when mime is all about being very centered, and it's a very, very different discipline than dance, and I think that really helps. It certainly helped me in my performance about being these centered, powered beings. We're not rushing through forests or running up and down stairs. We're just standing there and hopefully radiating great power.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the Cenobites had such a presence to them, and especially you and Doug Bradley, you guys actually had lines, so that added to it. But I feel like Nick and Simon, they did really good with theirs too, like portraying this menacing characters without actually talking. And you had a bit less makeup than Nick or Simon had on. Yeah. What was the process like for you for putting on the makeup? I mean, did you have to spend hours in the makeup chair?
Yes. Yeah. It took 4 hours to put the makeup on, and then a half an hour to get into the costume, because it was a lot of, lacing up of things and stuff. The whole process was they had to take a mold of my head so they could build, design the makeup to fit my face perfectly. And so there was a point where I had to come and they would put this stuff called alginate all over me. I had a skull cap on, obviously, so it wouldn't get in my hair. And then they did, and then they would wrap sort of plaster bandages around, and that would harden, and then they could take it off, the mold off, and then they would fill it, and then have a bust of my head, so they could design the makeup for me. And it was a very difficult, because I said previously I'm a bit claustrophobic, and the only input you're getting in is your air that you're breathing through your nose. And it was warming up because the plaster bandages were drying, and I started panicking, and they said, "It's okay, Barbie, it's okay, you can breathe, just calm down," because my heart was pounding. One of the actors, I can't remember who, he had to have a full body cast, and he actually freaked out and ripped it all off, which was very annoying to the makeup crew. So they had to do it one half at a time, I think. But it's it was kind of grueling, and also because I'm a bit of a chatterbox. I should have been the chatterer. I was like, yeah, I'm really hungry. I need to pee now. When are we going to have lunch? This, Barbie, please don't talk. We have to keep gluing your mouth back. But I kept on talking. But even if I said one of my lines, it was just the kind of glue they used. It was very, they constantly had to, after every take, the boys were there sort of fixing me up. So it was a difficult process for them. And then at the end of the day, and then you'd have to wait 6 hours to get in front of the camera, of course. And then at the end of the day, it would take an hour to get the stuff off, because you had to use a special process. And the first time it came off, my skin was really pink underneath. I went, "Ooh, my skin's all pink." And they said, "Yeah, that's oxygen starvation." Great. What am I doing to my face?
Yeah. I thought the Cenobites are very interesting characters, and I feel like they're characters. They're very fascinating, and they're characters where you want to know, where do these beings come from? Like, what did Clive give you guys, like, backstories to your characters?
I read the novella, The Hellbound Heart, which is wonderful, and I do recommend it to anybody, because it's full of his trademark, horror, sex, humor, which I always called Clive the Hemingway of horror, because he writes so brilliantly and sparely and muscularly, and it's just wonderful stuff. Not really, and you just had to. When I asked Tony Randall, I said, because my plane had been delayed, so I actually arrived at Heathrow and had to drive directly to Pinewood, and everyone was mad at me, and it wasn't my fault because my plane had got delayed, but because I'd been visiting my parents, and for Christmas, I think it was, and I went up to Tony, and it was the first entrance of the Cenobites in Hellbound, and I said, "What's my motivation?" Which is like the most awful, lame question anybody could ask. And he just said, "You're dead." So that was my backstory. But over the years, I think it was Gary Tunnicliffe who came up with the idea she might have been a nun. Obviously, I'm not the girl that I get turned into. There's a brunette lady who was, I don't know who her name was, but because, in 2009, Paul Kane, who wrote the Hellraiser films and their legacy, put together an anthology called Hellbound Hearts, and he wanted me to write a story, and I said, well, I don't really write horror, I'm more interested in crime, because I was working on my serial killer novel. And he said, "Oh, go on, Barbie. It's great to have a feminine perspective." And so I basically wrote a backstory to a female Cenobite because of legal things. It had to be based on the novella rather than the films. And she was a nun, and she just got sick of her life and she wanted to experience the ultimate in sensual suffering. So I created this character based on Clive's mythology called Sister Celise, and I've written 3 stories about her, which are in my anthology of horror stories. But I thought it was interesting that in the original novella, all 3 major characters were female. Julia, Kirsty, and the lead Cenobite was female in the novella. And they just decided to... I think it's probably a bit more balanced to have it as a male Cenobite. But that was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah. So, I noticed a little bit later in your career, you got to be in a commercial with Dennis Leary for a anti-drinking campaign or something like that. I mean, that was kind of funny.
Yes. The irony was it was sponsored by, I can't remember, a beer company. Oh, that was, my stuck in a car with Dennis Leary for a day. That was really, and these 2 little kids in the back seat, and I'll never forget the actor saying, because he was sort of complaining a bit about the money, and he said, "Gosh, it's not a lot of money to be paid, when you're going to be called an asshole for like 3 months or something." Yeah, he had written this song called "He's an Asshole," and he had rewritten the lyrics to fit people who drink and drive. And I remember my agent was kind of horrified, because he'd had kids, I said, well, it's after the watershed. They only showed it after 9. He said, I don't care. I don't want my kids to sneak over and hear this. He's an asshole. I thought it was hilariously funny. He's wonderful. He actually was an actor, he said, and he couldn't get a job, so he became a stand-up comedian. He said, the irony is, I'm being offered acting jobs, but because I became famous as a stand-up comedian. And then, of course, he went on to write that TV series, Rescue Me, didn't he, and star in it. But he was a very, very bright, intelligent guy, but kind of bitter. But maybe that's just his persona. But it was kind of funny. But they wanted me to wear a pink tracksuit for the part. I actually just wore some of my own clothes and stuff, but my agent said, Barbie wouldn't use a pink tracksuit to prop open her door. She'll wear what she feels is correct for the part. I just love that. I'm not exactly the tracksuit type. But it was a funny day. But at the end of the day, he had something else. He just walked away without saying goodbye, which I thought was kind of funny considering we'd been, 5 people in a car all day. But, he was a busy guy, so.
Well, okay, so, you mentioned written some short stories for some horror anthologies, and you've written your own novel called The Venus Complex. Tell us a little bit about that. What's that about?
Well, I've always been fascinated by serial killers because I am not one, you'll be relieved to hear. I am just the antithesis of serial killers. I care far too much. I'm very empathic. But when I first read about the phenomena of psychopaths and serial killers, and I think it was in a book called The Order of Assassins by Colin Wilson, and then I read about Ted Bundy, I thought, holy moly, what is that all about? So, and of course, Jack the Ripper and all these characters, these mysterious characters. And so I studied forensic psychology, read a bunch of histories of serial killers. I read the writings of serial killers. I interviewed a homicide detective who just finished a serial killer case in New York, and forensic psychologists. And then I set about creating this character of Michael Friday, who's an art history professor who tries to kill himself and his wife in an car accident, because he's just tired of life, and gets some front temporal lobe damage, which means no impulse control. And then he starts getting very obsessed about this one woman, and he decides he's going to create these artistic crimes because she's a forensic psychologist. And but what I really wanted to explore was not only his motivations, but also his sexual fantasies, because everyone, it's all about power. Well, actually, no, if they're having sex with, if they're sort of forcing themselves, it's also about sex. So that was interesting, and it prompted Fangoria, America's at that time best-selling horror magazine, to call me one of the finest purveyors of erotically charged horror around. And also I was being interviewed by someone about the book, and I said, what's your day job? Because he was a horror blogger, and he said, I'm a policeman. I said, what did you think of the police procedural in the book? And he went, spot on. But what I want to know is, how did you know what men really think about women? I found that, he said, he found that very disturbing. He said, I can't, if I had not known, I would say that no woman could have written this book. He said, how did you find out our secrets? So that's fine praise indeed. So no, I was very pleased with how the book came out. I mean, not everybody likes it. It's pretty raw, and it is very much stuck in his mind. But it's what I wanted to write. And but the other things, it's called the Venus Complex. He's sort of the crimes he creates. All the corpses are posed in to mirror these paintings that he likes, because he's an art historian, so he puts that in the mix. But then, at the same time, I was also, because of the first Sister Celise story, I was asked to submit horror stories to different anthologies. And at the, a couple of years ago, I thought, gosh, I've got enough for a collection. And I'd been asked to review a book by Daniel Serra, the artist who did my cover for the Venus Complex, by this SST Publications, Paul Fry. And he said, Barbie, if you ever have a project you want to, please consider my company. And I thought, I do. I want to have a collection of short horror stories, but I want each story to be illustrated by a top artist in the genre in full color. And he went, I'm your man. So it's trade hardback, deluxe edition, and paperback Kindle. But it was so much fun, because we got Danny on board. He did 2 illustrations. And then I thought, my God, why don't I ask Clive? And Clive very kindly allowed me the use of 3 of his artworks, the cover, the painting called She Waits, and then 2 more for the first Sister Celise story, and a story called Gaia. And then Nick Percival, who did the covers for the Hellraiser comics for Boom Comics, did Zulu Zombies, and Ben Baldwin did Altdruck, Steve McGuinness did Polyp, Tara Bush did Botophobia, and Eric Gross did the 2 other Sister Celise stories. Have I remembered all the artists' names? Yes, Clive, Nick Percival, Steve McGuinness, Daniel Serra, Eric Gross, Tara Bush, Vincent Sammy, and Ben Baldwin. Vincent Sammy did the most amazing artwork for my American Mutant. It's a picture of a little boy, and he's got the hands of good and evil. And I asked him, he's also done the poster for another project I'm involved with called Blue Eyes, which is I'm exec producing a feature-length horror movie based on a story I've written with Chris Alexander, the former editor of Fangoria. And he's directing it, composing the music, and we're working on the script together. So no, it's been wonderful doing this collection, because because I just gave them the story and the artists came up with their artwork. I didn't sort of give them any direction. So it's like a delicious cocktail of art and horror.
Now, is this collection out yet, or is this something that's...
Oh, yeah, it's been out for, when did it come out? Very late 2015.
Okay. And
so,
what's the name of it?
It's called Voices of the Damned.
Okay.
And the 3 Sister Celise stories, according to Publishers Weekly, this character-based exploration is sensual in its brutality. I like that. That was the sound of the book hitting the desk. So, yes. So that's out, and it's pretty yummy looking book. And the Venus Complex is still available. It's all available on Amazon and the usual suspects.
Yeah, no, both sound like great reads. I'm going to have to check those out, definitely.
Oh, please do. Please do. You can also get signed, dedicated copies directly from sstpublications.co.uk.
Okay. Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and you've got your Blue Eyes movie coming out. That's exciting.
Yes, well, that's very exciting. We're going into production soon. We're still working on the script, but I just got the first draft from Chris, and I can't tell you how exciting it is if you just write a story, and then someone comes back and says, "Here's how I've." It's just like a synthesis of minds. It's like, if I couldn't have done a better job or a more sympathetic job if I'd written it myself. But I knew he'd get it. That's why I sent it to him. Oh, by the way, Chris, I've just written a new story. Would you like to read it? And he just said, I've got to make this movie. So it's starring Nivek Ogre from Skinny Puppy. I don't know if you know the band Skinny
Oh, yeah,
Puppy.
definitely,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's sort of, I'm not sure. It's sort of like Bukowski's Barfly meets Under the Skin, which is that strange Scarlett Johansson film. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very disturbing film. I mean, I don't know if that's the really correct way of putting it, but it sort of mentions elements of it. There's strange things going on, and there's the central character who's a homeless person. Well, he has a room, but he's really down on his last. Is that the right expression? Down in the dirt, down. He's down. He's just rock bottom. That's it. But he manages to find a way to get even darker and downer. But no, it's very exciting. So, but as with all these things always take longer than you anticipate, especially when you're going the indie route. And Chris is very determined to do this the way he wants to. So, which I completely understand. He's an auteur, and he doesn't want any interference. Because I thought, well, we're both Canadian. Why don't we try and get some money from the Canadian Film Commission or something? And he went, they'll want to ask questions, and they'll want to know this, and they'll want to, they might want to change the script. Who knows? So we're just doing it on our own, which is very exciting. Yeah, and I think, just, considering I just read an article about George Romero, and he was very much not part of the Hollywood machine. And he even was saying that, he said it's all businessmen now. It's all, he's almost predicted what's, the recent horror, he was talking about it in the 70s. I was very honored to be invited to his Hollywood Star ceremony, which I was there on Wednesday. And it was a really moving and wonderful tribute to a man who created this really new genre. He said, I never called them zombies. Zombies are, if you look at the whole voodoo tradition, they're actually living people. They're not raised from the dead. But, it's sort of, he and Clive sort of created a new kind of monster, which is, Clive with the Cenobites and George with his Night of the Living Dead films. And, and we saw, they showed Creepshow as a special sort of tribute to him in this wonderful theater. Oh, I hadn't seen it in so long, and it was so funny seeing, Ted Danson and and who else was it?
Leslie Nielsen.
Yes.
And Ed Harris.
Ed Harris was so hilarious. He was so young and shiny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's and it's like E.G. Marshall, was it
the guy with the bugs?
Yeah,
I was. Yeah. That was the one I actually had to avert my eyes because I got a problem with cockroaches, and it was wonderful seeing again. It was actually very funny too. It had a wonderful sense of humor. So, but no, I think I really admire people who manage not to get, too sucked into the whole Hollywood machine. Your Cronenbergs, Carpenters, Romeros, Coen brothers, they've managed to keep some separateness and autonomy, but it must be very difficult if you want to get a lot of money.
Sure, yeah. There's always
make a movie.
Yeah, there's always that tension of like wanting, to make money at doing what you love, but then not necessarily being able to do what you love. It's being controlled by the studios or whatever. So that there's always that. I could definitely see that being a definite struggle there.
Yeah, but I mean, enough wonderful films are made. I mean, I think, if the studio had had enough control, they might have said, listen, we really need to cut a bit from Blade Runner 2049, because I thought it could have been, me, the expert, yes. But I felt it was a little bit long. But it's haunting me. I want to see it again. Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to say, okay, if I can't tell this story in 2 hours, these are my thoughts. People can disagree with me, but I think it's important to say, let's see if we can just tighten things up and tell the story in 2 hours. 2 hours, 40 minutes is a long film nowadays, but it's a magnificent, beautiful film. But I think the original Blade Runner was around 2 hours, and that told a wonderful story. So that to me was groundbreaking. But you may not remember, or you may not have even been born. I don't know. But it wasn't a hit when it came out. People thought it was weird and pissed off, and which of course made me love it even more.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that's those movies. They're the kind of movies that really stand out. You see the originality behind the creativity that went into them, and just it makes them very valuable. In the context of film, and you don't see it. There are some great films you made, but when the really good ones or when the really weird ones come out, those are the ones that seem to stand out more and gain their cult following. Just like Hellraiser. It's same thing. I feel.
Well, exactly. I after I finished Hellraiser, I went back to doing, TV presenting. I was presenting, a film review program at the same time. They had to shoot around my schedule. And then I eventually, acting left me behind, as thespians say, around, a couple of years later, and I went into being a casting director. And worked for MTV, for The Real World and stuff like that. And, I just went on with my life, and then I started writing and stuff. And then, oh gosh, when was it? It was about 2005, I think, or something like that. Somebody said, do you want to do a convention? And I went, why? They go, for Hellraiser. What? And I found out they'd made, 6 more films, and at that time. And I did one in America, and I had no idea. Obviously, the film had been shown late night on the Horror Channel, because we didn't even have a Horror Channel in the UK. All these people came up to me and said, "You scared me to death when I was 8 years old." And I say, "What were your parents thinking?" But no, I had no idea how popular the films had become. It was just, it was, people probably don't like me saying this, but, it was a job, and then I went on to my next job, and I didn't sort of keep track. But of course, the whole production moved over to the United States, and New Line, I think the company was called. So most of the films all of the films after that were either shot in the United States, and then, they did one in Romania, I think. So I had no idea that there was this interest and fandom growing for Hellraiser.
Yeah, there's definitely quite a cult following, especially, with the Cenobites. I think people are just generally interested in those characters that, it's, like you said, it's just something you don't see every day. It was like a new creature, a new monster. But it had, it wasn't just a monster. It was like a character that had some depth to it. So it's really cool.
Well, also, you get a little touch of what Pinhead was, seeing his transformation at the beginning, is that he was some sort of British Army officer and in some place in the Raj or North Africa or something. And but it's always interesting. People often say that, to me, my favorite Hellraiser is the first one. But a lot of people say their favorite film is the second one, simply because you see a little bit of background to the Cenobites, and people are fascinated to know what caused them, which is why they must read my Silesium trilogy of female Cenobite stories, she said in a shameless plug for her book.
Yeah, no doubt. Everybody, you need to go check those out, because I'm definitely fascinated by those, and I want to know what this backstory is. So.
Well, she creates her own box, too. She gets the toy maker to make her own box.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because she wants to make more female Cenobites, because the third story is called The Silesium Rebellion of the Female Cenobites. And there's this big, kerfuffle in hell, because she wants to take over.
Wow, okay.
And it ends badly for everybody. But there's a little bit of hope. I'm writing the fourth story now. It's called Queen of the Labyrinth.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Barbie, this has been a pure pleasure to talk to you. I just want to say thanks. It's been an honor to have you on the show today.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure. I've really enjoyed chatting.
And thank you to our listeners for checking out this double feature episode. It was a lot of fun to talk to Simon and Barbie. So I know that they would appreciate it if you guys go check out what they're doing. They're both involved in some really cool projects right now, and they're both really nice, friendly people. Especially if you see them at a convention, go say hi. And for next week, we're going to have a special surprise interview. It still has to do with the theme of hell, but it's not really the Hellraiser franchise. This is another movie that has the word hell in the title. You may remember a weird little movie from the 80s called Motel Hell. Well, we interviewed Kevin Conner, the director of that. And so it was a really fun interview. So guys, go check it out next week when it comes out. And for our friends over at Fright Club Podcast, you'll get an extra little surprise in there for you too. I wanted to take a minute to give a shout out to one of our listeners. This guy, he's shared our episodes as they come out. He does it all the time, every week when they come out. So we really appreciate it. I just want to say thanks to Don and Ellie, and if you guys, and he's very active in the podcasting world as well. He is one of the co-hosts on the Horror Mafia podcast. It's him and two other guys that talk about horror movies, and has kind of like an Italian spin on it, that Italian attitude. So it's pretty funny. Go check that out. And also he does some reviews with the Asian Film Vault, so you can go look them up on Facebook. And he also writes some articles for Death by Podcast. So yeah, go check him out in those different places. He does a lot of movie reviews. He supports a lot of podcasts by sharing posts and stuff. So go over, check out his podcast. Again, that's the Horror Mafia podcast. Support him. He's supported us a lot this year. So, Don, just want to thank you once again for supporting the show. And as always, you can find us out there on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Black Cat Podcast. You can also find Phantom Dark Dave at Phantom Dark Dave. And you can find us on Facebook and Horror Amino as well. And you can email us with any comments or concerns or just whatever. Just say hi. Our email is blackcatpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also email Dakota at dakshadowbane@gmail.com. That's DAKSHADOWBANE@gmail.com. You can go check out blackcatshadow.com, where you'll find all of our past episodes and the links where you can download them to listen to them whenever you'd like, as well as the link to our YouTube channel and the Black Cat Shadow movie store. So remember to take a closer look at the world around you, and you may just find that it is stranger and more mysterious than you thought, especially in the Black Cat Shadow.